Hello, and thank you all for joining us today in the cinema here at Leeds School of Arts. Before we start, just a little bit of housekeeping. We're not expecting a fire drill this afternoon, so if it goes off, it is for real. And if you could leave by the fire exit at the top or the side, and we meet at Cafe Nero, which is at the back of this building, overlooking the hospital. So fingers crossed that's not going to happen. And just to also say that today's talk is being filmed by our broadcast media, technology staff and students. And this film will be made available to view on the Leeds Arts Research Centre website after the event. Okay, my name is Marion Harrison, Senior Lecturer in Fine Art here at Leeds Beckett University. And with my colleague, Professor Sue Miller, from the School of Film, Music and Performing Arts, we are really delighted to welcome you to the final of our 23-24 Inside Out talks. Strange Looks, Ghost Codes and the Dream Share Seer, a tool visualising the co-created dream life of a community with Adam Chodzko. Our Inside Out lecture series aims to bring new and exciting speakers to inspire and support the work and research students and staff do across the Leeds School of Arts here at Leeds Beckett. The Inside Out talks can be a space for speakers to share new research, insights and inquiries. And we're really delighted to welcome Adam here today, not only as a contemporary artist who has exhibited extensively in international solo and group shows since 1991, including Tate Britain, Tate St Ives, Raven Row, Museo d'Arte Moderna Bologna, the Mallorca Museum Athens and the Istanbul and Venice Biennales, but also as one of our new PhD students here at Leeds Beckett University. Adam's major new project, which is the focus of his practice-led PhD, Fine Art, visualising an island's community's collective nocturnal dreams through artificial intelligence and Malaysian indigenous dream work, launches this week. And I think Adam will be talking a lot more about that. Welcome, Adam. Adam Chodzko is a visual artist working across media, exploring our conscious and unconscious behaviours, social relations and collective imaginations through artworks created as a speculative form of social media. He asks, or his work asks, through vision, how can we be? His recent book, fantastic book, Our Look, you can still just about see his little legs, explores artistic practice in relationship to the 16th century Peter Bruegel painting, and his current and forthcoming projects include a group exhibition which is currently on at the Nouveau Museo de National de Monaco until the end of September. A permanent sculpture has just been completed in Barn Elms, London, commissioned by Tideway. An audio walk, The Mysterious Return of the Fleet Street Heads, from the 4th to the 6th of June in Northfleet, London, through the arts organisation Cement Fields, and a forthcoming project, Super Slow Way, near Accrington, along the Leeds-Liverpool Canal this summer. Adam will talk for approximately an hour and 15 minutes, and then we'll open up for questions. And Adam has also very kindly said that he's going to put together a list of artists and references that he mentions in the talk today, and this will be shared with you either via the Eventbrite email that you signed up with, or if you want to leave your email address with us afterwards, we'll make sure that you get that list of questions. So, without any further delay, Adam, welcome to Leeds.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Marion. Yeah, so the list of references is just so that you don't have to take any notes if you felt the inclination. I know it always requires a kind of energy and a commitment to turn up to these events, and there's always the risk that it might be terrible. But it's a real honour to be part of the amazing Inside Out lectures. I've just started dipping into some of them online, and they're just a really incredible resource. There's so many brilliant talks there. So I'm very excited to be here. And it's my first fancy lecture for a while. I mean, no, not that it's going to be a fancy lecture. I mean, in a fancy institution, in a fancy lecture theatre, with fancy people. It's basically my first big lecture for over a year, and because of working on various projects, mostly alone, and because they've all gone so much slower and been so much more labour-intensive than I'd hoped, and I do this work mostly at home from where I live in Whitstable in Kent, way down in the southeast, near the sea. I don't have a lovely studio. I work from inside a very messy cupboard. So over the last 6 months or so, unfortunately, I just don't get out much. So I'm quite overexcited, perhaps, to have the opportunity to talk with you as a group, all at once, all together. And I guess then to try to honour this rare opportunity of a somewhat captive audience. I'm about to speak a lot of words. So it's a monologue about being an artist and talking about my artwork, but also I'll be talking about artwork and struggling to find the right words that resonate well for what I think I do is really, really useful for my thinking, for my making, as well as being essential for those occasional times when I have to attempt to communicate it to others. But paradoxically, my emotional relationship to all the words is that ideally, I'd like them to be kept well clear of the work, at a really good distance from the artwork. But a talk like this, strangely, can give the wrong impression because it suggests that all my work relies on this need to be spoken about and explained. But I like being away from the finished work when and wherever it's encountering its own audience and exists without my kind of annoying interference. So I guess there needs to be a little logo on my lectern, probably in Comic Sans, saying, remember to forget all of this. As part of being an artist, I've been teaching all over the place, which I really enjoy, and as well as attempting to share my limited knowledge and experience, the teaching process is a lot about me learning through being in dialogue, an ongoing dialogue with students. So with you now, I'm partly talking from my artist persona, but I'm also talking to you from my kind of teaching persona. But also, as Marion said, I'm here as a student, just at the start of my PhD, which of course is practice-led. So in 3 years' time, when my PhD should be complete, I might have some answers to some of the questions I'll be raising over the next kind of 90 minutes or so about that PhD project. And so I'll do another talk outside here in the car park, if there is a car park. It's just in the car park to whoever wants to come along. So put that in your diaries for sort of November 2026. So artist, teacher, student, is there anyone else also talking now? Well, yeah, I think so, because there are other characters, or speakers too. There are other narrators. And as I make each bit of work, that process of making inadvertently creates a narrator for me, who is, of course, partly me, the artist, but also it's a new character within me who develops in me through that particular act of making. So it's all quite busy socially, all these different voices trying to utter stuff together. So I've now begun the long and awkward process of speaking the artist's talk in this place with you. And by the end, there will have been a lot of words that have come spilling out of my mouth. Therefore, in my preparation for that speaking, to sort of rebalance it, it was useful for me to do a bit of careful listening. In this case, to some music I really love, but feel I can never hear enough, fully enough. And here is a nice sound system to play it through. So it was playing during that kind of weird time when you were drifting as audience into the lecture theatre and we're all getting settled and I'm feeling very nervous. And through my listening to that music, I can slowly persuade myself to sit quite happily with that nervousness. But also I'm playing these tunes thinking about being the audience, because as well as being an artist, as part of being an artist, I'm often audience. I'm also the viewer, because we need to take it in turns very equally about what role we have in that relationship. And so I often try to push a kind of leakiness from the event or the artwork, from the conventional spaces these operate in, and the conventions about when things tend to start and when they end. And I like to leak this centering into the spaces both before and after they traditionally seem to exist. So before you came in here, there was a video trailer sent out with the publicity for this talk, which, I don't know, maybe one or two of you might have seen. And then you come into this room and the lecture looks a little bit like it might have started. There's some sounds and images playing. So I like thinking of this kind of prior leakage as a form of preparation. Perhaps it's ritualistic. Perhaps it's a bit like a stretching exercise before moving, so that we're ready for something to happen. Yes, but what about afterwards? Where's the leakage ahead of us, out from this talk? As I said, you'll all instantly forget my talk as soon as you leave the auditorium, like this. But soon I'm going to be giving each of you something physical, a small object, as a going home present, minus the bedraggled slice of Little Mermaid cake and the soggy paper napkin. But this can be the method by which this talk leaks into the space ahead of us, beyond the institution, outside the building, in just under a couple of hours' time. And I know you all do different kinds of making. You're all involved in different forms of creativity at different scales and different materials. So although I'm an artist and I work across a lot of different media, I'm sort of in that artist community, which of course is made up of lots of other smaller communities who are often in conflict with each other. So when you hear me say the artist or artwork, I'm just speaking really lazily. I mean it in a very broad sense in terms of media. So I'd love for you to apply it to whatever you do in terms of your own practices. So film and filmmaking, or performer and performance, writer and text, music and musician, teacher and lesson. So seeing the parallels and affinities between our hugely diverse creative processes, and of course I include science in this too, I think is increasingly important for working collectively as a position of resistance at a time of incredible change. And in this particular moment, when the very existence of art subjects are becoming extra precarious, but both within academia and also, education as a whole. So in this room, collectively, then, I'm not really good at counting the number of people, but I'm assuming most people maybe are over the age of 20, but just trying to do the maths, we share at least a sort of maybe 1,000 years of knowledge. No, maybe that's, let's say 800 or something, but that's a lot, and yet why don't we seem to know anything? And if we also believe we carry intergenerational knowledge within our bodies, there's thousands of years more. And if we also believe that we operate with other deeper, hidden, pre-conscious connections between us and the world, this probably means there's thousands of other years in there too. So with that abundance, it seems like a good idea to ensure we guide this accumulated knowledge into an ecology or system that works together, which of course is partly the function of the university. So how can we manifest this collective space right now, perhaps only as we sleep at night in our dreams? How might our dreams be connecting? More on this later. As you see, I'm letting my previous words flow by as I talk. So as you hear me talking about one thing and yet showing another, that's intentional, and I hope it won't be too distracting. You'll just see them floating by, and they might happen to coincide with what I'm talking about, or they might not. We can just let them go. I should add, a lot of the clips are from some of my moving image works, and most of them as artwork are totally reliant on the sound. I love working on the sound that accompanies them to activate that meaning and atmosphere in them. And yet the sound is stripped out here, which leaves them quite bare. But this is also partly to suggest the works are doing their own thing independently from me, in spite of me, which is of course their reality. Once they're made, I have no control over them. They're just running around by themselves like little squirrels. So hopefully here now we can make between us a kind of liveness to all of this, particularly having gone through a pandemic together. This live group space now here seems very precious. So for this talk, I feel I need to offer you something that couldn't have been just turned into a PDF and emailed to each of you. So I won't be giving that style of artist talk in the form of the generic chronological plod, starting with my genius potato prints as a child, because I have a website. And it's about 90% complete, and it offers exactly that. It's a kind of chronological plod. It actually begins in 1991, so my potato prints from nursery aren't in there yet. And also, as Marion said, published early last year, there's also this little book which I wrote with my own fingers, and it gives you a kind of overview into certain ways of thinking that I'm slowly discovering I have a tendency for. And most of my video work you can now watch on Vimeo. There's no password. It's probably all been scraped already, and no one seems to watch it, so I don't password protect it. And you can find the links to each video work within my website. And my current work, which I'll talk about in a bit, has a form of artist talk built into it in the form of a ridiculous number of answers to invented, frequently asked questions. So over time, I've generated all those different ways that are available to share different aspects of my practice to different publics, but knowing these different forms are already present also frees me up to do something else with a talk like this. I'll occasionally use this. So it's to function like an edit in film. It moves us into the next space or the next chapter or the next level. And maybe if you're asleep when you hear it, you'll wake up. And then maybe if you're awake when you hear it, you'll fall asleep. After making and exhibiting work over the last 30 years, there's quite a lot of it. And unless you're, I don't know, someone like Picasso, most of an artist's work just isn't seen. So an artist's talk becomes this incredibly rare opportunity to show everything. But you'll be relieved to know I've resisted that temptation because I have tried it in the past and it's a horrible mess. So instead, I'll focus this talk on just a very few different looking works. And I mean, they're different looking because of course, deep down within my blind spot and beyond my words and behind the sort of mask of heterogeneous media, I'm of course finding that I'm making the same work over and over again. But shh. However, if you'd like that horribly short nutshell summary, my work explores how seeing might transform us and how seeing might ignite in us an awareness of other possible realities to this particular one we're inhabiting right now, and how that might lead to deeper and more diverse levels of connection between us. And in this talk, I'm focusing on particularly the idea of embodying the scene, as in S-E-E-N. So becoming an image that becomes a body. But before I go any further, what is my relationship to these works? I've claimed a few times already that I'm an artist. But whenever I say that, which is not that often in everyday life, I feel something squirm a bit uncomfortably in the pit of my stomach. So if any of you know Bob's Burgers, it's the kind of sound of "ugh" that Tina Belcher makes. I feel a bit squeamish about saying it. I'm an artist. And this discomfort hasn't eased over the last 30 years I've been making art. Being an artist doesn't sit perfectly with me. I have some really good associations with it and some less good ones. However, I love art. I love making art. I love many artists. I love many artworks. I love many things. But I think it's helpful to acknowledge how what we say can shift us emotionally in ways that might surprise us, and therefore to keep an eye on that emotional register and not to avoid these awkward feelings, but instead lean into them to explore where your gut or your heart needs to tell you that this listening is creatively really useful for helping you refine your practice. So again, I'm an artist. Ugh. And I work across a lot of different media. So yeah, you've seen, some video work, but also sculpture, and sound.
Create between them and me wonderful little webs together. But before my brief silence, let me...
Performance, drawings, things in galleries, sort of participatory processes in galleries. That's more things in galleries. Things beyond galleries. So this is Reunion Salo from 1998. So this was where I searched within Italy, but particularly within Rome, in sort of going into Pasolini's last film, Salo, which he made in 1975, so 23 years later, after it's made, to try and find the 16 adolescents who were killed, fictionally killed, within that film. to try to stage a reunion party with them. And it's the piece that's, as Marion said, the exhibition in Monaco, which is about the brilliant Pier Paolo Pasolini. But actually, now I think about it, this is probably not a particularly good example of an artwork that goes beyond the gallery, because it's in a museum. Okay. Often one work will slip between different mediums over time. So I guess we could call that intermedia or transmedia. For instance, this work, Ghost, is a sculpture. You can see it being sculptural. But it then becomes an immersive participatory experience for its audience. So both artist and audience literally get into the sculpture. So I ferry individual members of the public who are resting, reclined in this vessel. But this action then becomes video documentation and a kind of archiving project. So Ghost as a whole cycles through these different states back and forth. And this is the project that I'm doing near Accrington along the Leeds-Liverpool Canal this summer with Super Slowway, as Marion mentioned. So why my need for this fluidity between medias? Well, partly I want to keep questioning, at least for myself, what might an artwork be? Like, what the hell is it? What can it do to a viewer? Can I destabilise some of those very well-worn agreements, those consensuses about how art is made and shown, but also how we behave with art, about how, we kind of, the sort of usual behaviour that happens to us when we stand in front of the artwork, a behaviour which sometimes leads us to have a kind of automatic reverence for it. Maybe it's an undeserved reverence, leading to a passivity and a disempowerment for the viewer. And what do we believe we need individually and socially from the art object, even a dematerialised, procedural, collaborative art object, for it still to exist as art? And in fact, why is it important that it's considered as art and not some other category of making with a wholly different identity? So I see my work as being speculative. It's a sort of proposition. It's a kind of science fiction, a channeling of a flow from a slightly different reality. As I make each artwork, I find it really useful to fantasize that it slowly becomes something that isn't really art anymore. So as a bridge between realities, the strange artwork now becomes normalized. It becomes everyday, ubiquitous. It's just how things are done in that parallel world. So one example, maybe with Ghost, perhaps in this parallel reality, it operates as a ritual object, as interface or tool for how we might relate to each other. So you just have one in every town that was near water, and people would just use it for a particular quality of interaction, perhaps for intimacy, maybe the equivalent of holding hands. For this to happen, it would then need to stop being art. So in order that it could function in that intimate, personal, symbolic, ritualistic and relational way. But unfortunately in this reality now, we still need it to exist as art. So let's imagine another example. Let's say that instead of Facebook or Instagram, each morning as we woke as a community, we loaded our dream descriptions from last night into a digital tool so that our individual nocturnal dreams would become visualized for everyone to see. And that process became familiar to everyone across the world. It was just very ordinary, just one of the everyday ways in which we democratically relate and share knowledge and our innate, extraordinary creativity. So again, my work exists as a form of sci-fi. It's a kind of hyperstition where we hope to shape reality through making art out of wondering, what if? Wouldn't it be good if? I'm trying to share my body of work, as the totality of an artist's practice is often referred to, the body of work. Or maybe it's more accurate to say, in this time available, in this particular space now, is part of the body of work. So maybe it is just the legs. The body of work for me is a bit like working on a garden, in that it all needs care, even the early bits, because it's all sort of out of control and it's constantly changing. Or it's like cooking one elaborate meal over 30 years. By the way, all my analogies are all very domestic. Food, relationships, gardening. I need to keep checking this body of work. Is it inert? Has it become a dead body? Hopefully not. Hopefully it's a live moving body, perhaps a live falling body, a complex organic system with loads of different parts all flowing together in a constant state of change. Or perhaps it's not a human body at all. The artist's body of work is perhaps better thought of as a plant body, a body that is inextricably linked and connected to everything else in the world, from, I don't know, from dolphins to vomit, to Doritos, to Rees-Mogg's knees, all forming a kind of carnivalesque space together. By the way, if you need some context for this notion of wider inclusive ecologies, I'd say new materialism, posthumanism, Rosie Bradotti, Karen Barad, with organic and non-organic entities continuously coming into being together. So for me, the unstable status of the artwork and its encounter with its audience puts that interaction into a state of becoming. It becomes something as you perceive it. It becomes something because you perceive it. My own affinities for this kind of slipperiness could come from my own innate jittery restlessness, or perhaps I'm just too lazy to make that decision about my pigeonhole. But I do see a value in being a bit of an amateur, a bit of an outsider to the medium, the form, or the subject of an artwork, instead hovering just outside it or just inside it on the edges. This produces a particular quality of perception, blissfully unaware of the tacit agreements we make about the limits of material, technique, or subject. You can just hover on the edge with highly unrealistic expectations. And if those go along with a kind of criticality and care, I think this can catalyse really fruitful, productive misunderstandings. I think this state of floating can be a really creative space. So for instance, a work I'll talk about in about 20 minutes uses AI via digital tool. But I'm using it a bit like a teenager, although a really strange teenager who's had to think through all the ethics. Although, like a teenager, spending a lot of time on it, just fascinated, but just seeing what it can do as a form of very conscious play, but not fetishizing the technology, but also with a growing certainty that despite being really happy, or kind of happy with what I've made, and of course very confused with what I've made, so becoming happy because I've created a dynamic, vibrant state of confusion for myself. So despite the state of kind of semi-satisfaction, I then don't plan on developing it as my sort of ongoing shtick, making endless other similar digital participatory AI works as product over the next decades. I mean, I'm very likely to circle back to it again, back to that medium in a few years, and my practice as a whole is made up of a sense of a kind of spiralling or weaving rather than a neat linear path. So I'll probably return to some form of it, but for now, this relationship is enough, and I now probably need to attend to something else that's going wrong in another bit of the garden. So knowing something, a medium, a material, a subject very well, being very familiar with it, being an expert, can of course be great, and I have huge respect for people who pursue that and can inhabit that. And I say this forgetting for a minute that I've just embarked on a PhD. But I feel that the sort of need for a certain level of professionalism can also create a kind of coziness and a conservatism that bad habits can develop, a fear of rocking the boat, an accepting of apparent limitations rather than pushing them, which is why, to give you an analogy, being in a long-standing romantic relationship should make us all experts of each other. But we know it doesn't necessarily work like that. In human relationships, external guidance, like from a friend or even a stranger, or couples therapy or a counsellor, can be really useful. It's useful to bring in an amateur to us, to briefly bring in an outsider. Familiarity can sometimes narrow our vision. So to deal with this, perhaps we need to become image moderators. I'll pick up this term, image moderator, again in a bit. And of course, we're all so increasingly aware of our own unconscious biases, how we can operate within an echo chamber or a filter bubble, that algorithmic bias that skews or limits the information an individual user sees on the internet. So being an outsider makes everything seem new and different to us because we see it from a position of uncertainty in an open state of being. And over time, of course, we're constantly changing. So I make my work, but I'm made by my work. I work in relation to the changing world around me, which shapes me, and I hope, reciprocally in tiny ways I shape it. So it's an ecology that's constantly changing and transforming. So acknowledging this in trying to communicate my work in words, it doesn't feel right to talk about my practice, but instead to speak in parallel with it, alongside that practice, or as Trinity Minhas says, nearby it. But perhaps there is another possibility to speak from inside the body of work, which is what I'm sort of struggling to attempt to try with you here now. So maybe it's useful to drop in a bit of my early biographical background, just as a little sort of hint of things that have shaped my way of looking. So I grew up in some ways, very ordinary family in the very boring outer suburbs of outer Greater London. And I think I felt this sort of growing resistance to that ordinary suburban quietness. And then on the other hand, my dad was Catholic, so he'd take me along to mass, to these opulent churches that were full of imagery and the kind of iconography of blood and magical transformations of things becoming other things. So bread turning into bodies, blood into wine, ceremony, ritual. So this multiplicity of vivid, stimulating imagery all happening simultaneously, suggesting that another reality was out there. And of course, this space also resonated with a lot of very extraordinary stories, parables full of ambiguity, moral ambiguity. But again, along with this rich complexity of possibility, this fantastic realm was the church's feeling of authority, oppressive history, of judgment, guilt, surveillance. It was all very male, all of which I felt very uncomfortable with and sought to resist. And then secondly, throughout my childhood, in parallel with going along and to churches, I had a terrible difficulty with sleep and a very rich and disturbing dream life at night. However, this intense dream and nightmare realm also suggested that there was a world beyond a slightly bland waking life of alphabetic spaghetti and top trumps and Blue Peter. Who is this Blue Peter, you ask? This demonic figure of blue lurking Peter. But I guess I'd say from these early beginnings, my work is often an active struggle to see properly, and the work is partly reflexively about that struggle. So on the one hand, sensing an abundance of the visual being constantly created and feeling there's too much to see, it's exhausting. In many indigenous cultures is the knowledge that it's not just humans who do the seeing, but it's the mountain and the forest and the rock who are also looking. They're looking back. It's an exchange of looks, but with the more than human in the position of dominance over the human, one where the human needs to be hugely respectful and humble. And then on the other hand, so there's all that seeing going on, and then on the other hand, we construct or have constructed for us by society all these ways in which we can't see ourselves or our destructive impacts on others. So as I just mentioned, our unconscious biases before, one obvious example would be white fragility. And of course, another equally alarming cognitive dissonance is our aversion to make our own radical behavioural changes in relation to the climate emergency. For me, a really brilliant example of this incapacity to see ourselves in relation to power dynamics comes from a few years ago through an experiment by psychologist Paul Piff, who's at the University of California. You may well have heard of it. So he invited pairs of strangers to play a rigged game of Monopoly where a coin flip would designate one player as rich and the others as poor. So at the start of the game, the rich players all receive twice as much money as their opponents. And as they play the game, they get to roll the dice twice instead of once. So they move around the board twice as fast as their opponent. And when they pass go, they collected $200. So that was California, £200 to their opponents, £100. So it was massively rigged. And really quickly, he observed this really fast behavioural change in the winning players. So they became very quickly very loud and aggressive, and they start thumping their, the dice down and the pieces down. They became very rude and contemptuous to the losing players. So very quickly through winning, they quickly lost compassion. and self-awareness as a result of privilege. And then the most extraordinary thing was at the end, when they were all asked, all the winners were asked what they attributed their success to. They claimed it was down to their cleverness and their own innate skill. So in the exhilaration of winning or dominating, they totally forgot that it was completely skewed in their favour from the outset. And we probably don't need a picture of, you know, Elon Musk or Trump here, or a group photo of our current government at one of their super fun lockdown parties. But of course the point is to recognise our own micro participations in this dynamic as we go about our day. One of the many things we learn and develop as artists of any sorts, as well as I think a really extraordinary self-reliance and a critical thinking and endless curiosity, is metacognition. So we learn to think about our own thinking. We become very good at observing where our attention goes, at noticing what fascinates our eyes, or for musicians, what fascinates their ears. And I guess I'm thinking about the reflexivity of seeing ourselves seeing as a form of loop or cycle, a kind of vibrant cycle, which I imagine as a process of weaving or building a web of new neural pathways in the mind, as well as things out there that we make in the world. And of course, looping, as we all know now, in the form of weaving through the Jacquard loom, became the foundation for modern computer programming. So a weave of seeing, thinking about our thinking and seeing where our attention goes. And we know our attention is scarce and precious. And as we know, parts of the digital world are actively trying to steal that attention from us the whole time. So we need to treat our attention with care and use critical ignoring in relation to this. So we notice our burning temptation to click on crap, and then we resist it, knowing that clicking on crap just very directly makes the world crappier. So to enter this exchange of looks, or this weave of looks, let's all become image moderators. So I'll just tell you a little anecdote about sleep and seeing and not being able to see, and about noticing oneself watching. And I'm going to circle back to 1987, and I'm in a small, dark, stuffy seminar room thinking about 19th century Parisian painting, because I studied art history at University of Manchester for my BA. I didn't do a fine art BA. And I love art history, but I chose to study art history rather than art because of some really silly choices as a teenager, which were based around the fact that before my BA, when I did an art foundation year, I seemed not to need to sleep. So I thought, I've got all this extra time, so I could do an art history degree during the day and find out, what all other artists did, and then I could just do my own creative work at night because I didn't need to sleep. But it didn't work at all, of course. So as soon as I began my BA, I caught up on a year's missed sleep, spreading it out over my 3 years of art history lessons. So I'm in the dark, hot seminar room, and it's dark, and it uses, it's dark because it needs the analog slide projector, which, if any of you don't know, because I'm going to be talking about them a bit, that's what goes inside them. I'm sure you do know that. I can never quite tell. So, yes, I'm in the dark, hot seminar room, and it's dark because of needing to see the images from the analog slide projector, and it's hot because of the heat coming off the analog slide projector, and I'm feeling sleepy because of the warm humming drone of the fan from the analog slide projector, and the tutor is talking about Manet's Bar at the Folies Bergère. So there it is, and that's it. Recently I went to go and see it at the Courtauld, where it hangs, and I'm falling asleep. But I know I can't be seen by the tutor because I'm right next to him, but with the projector between us. So I'm totally out of his sight. And I'm starting to enter this hypnagogic state between sleep and dream. And my tutor is discussing the well-known question about this painting. Is Manet's painting depicting a large mirror behind the woman? Or are there two different women, one with her back to us? Is it a reflection? We don't know. Is it a reflection? So, in hearing this, in this partially dream state, I then suddenly realise, in this hypnagogic state, that if there's a mirror in the painting, then of course my tutor will be able to see my reflection in this mirror and will spot that I'm fast asleep. So somehow in that sleep state, I ended up snagged in the projected image of a painting, or was I caught within the thin membrane of celluloid within the slide itself? So I'm thinking about sleeping into images, and of course the connections with dreaming, and about a superabundance of imagery, Instagram, Netflix, exhausting us. And I'm thinking about archives of imagery and the materiality of those archives and their imagery. And of course, we know that digital imagery is still very material, reliant on extractive minerals, extractive labour, huge amounts of water, huge amounts of energy. There's a performative lecture story I used to perform back in 2006 called Longshore Drift, Early Detroit Techno and Other Processes of Erosion. And it begins with me chatting away about the observations, my observations about walking along the beach and about seeing various groups of objects washed up on that beach. So there's a stretch of beach which is just full of tiny little buttons, you know, from clothing. And there's another one with car keys. You go a bit further on and there's one with videotape that's washed up. And then further on from that, one with 35mm slides. And it's slowly dawning on me that each image would move through the waves slightly differently due to the distribution of emulsion on the celluloid film that made up each image. So each one would have a different amount of kind of drag. So an image like this would move quite quickly, just skimming along the surface. Whereas an image like this would sort of lag a bit underwater because of a heavier build-up of shadow. So the sea would sort them in this way, arranging this data set as an artificial intelligence, and they'd end up deposited on the beach in a sequence decided both by the imagery, the materiality of that imagery, and its ability to move through the sea. And the work I made for this, from this was me then trying to make sense of this order governed by ocean currents and photographic imagery. So as a new form of this, I mentioned a going home present, and I have some 35mm slides for you now as a weenie gift for you to take home. So there's someone else's family holiday snaps from the early 60s to the mid 80s. So don't look at them. Just hang on to them. Just pop them in behind your ear or something. So yeah, they're from the 60s to the mid 80s. I haven't really looked at. We're all going to look at them together at the end, but don't look at them for now. So yeah, they're all from one family. They're a family I don't know. You probably don't know them, but perhaps you might recognise someone. They're all from a housing clearance. They're all now messed in together, so their sequence is lost. And one of the things I really like about 35mm film as objects, as opposed to the relationship, say, between a negative and a print, is that the positive transparency film that holds the image was actually physically inside the camera, in the same place, you know, smelling the same smells, feeling the same heat where the image was made. So it's in front of its subject, but also only a few centimetres or probably only a few millimetres from the eye of whoever took the picture. So now if you pass them around the room, make sure everyone has one, just take one each, doesn't matter which one, just randomly let your fingers choose, pick a card, any card, and then yes, just hold on to it, and in the final few seconds of the talk, we'll look at them. So while those circulate, I'm just going to continue. Let's look at some clips of a couple of works where other people's images are being moderated or edited or projected onto. So first of those is Pickers from 2009, and I think maybe this showed with a pavilion here in Leeds maybe a year ago, I'm not sure. Anyway, it shows Romanian migrant workers at a strawberry farm very near me in Kent who were sorting through apparently a very British archive that I gave them, that I pulled together, documenting hop picking taking place in the same landscape. And it's the hop picking archive is from the 1930s through to the 70s, and that's, as I said, it's the same sort of earth that's generating this footage as the same as the strawberry farm. And at the point you're going to see in the clip I've selected is the former Romanian migrant workers. It's towards the end of the piece, which is not that long, but they've grown a bit weary about discussing what they're seeing in the film archives, and although they're still playing with the imagery in front of them, they're kind of, in terms of their attention, they're sort of heading inwards into their heads to discuss their own dreams.
Și visasem că în fața blocului luase foc o pădure întreagă și în fine eram anunțat că era sfârșitul lumii sau ceva genul ăsta. Și nu-mi găseam papuci să ies afară, că trebuia să ieșim neapărat afară. Și nu-mi găseam papuci și în fine era ziua mea. În fine era ciudat, atunci știam mai multe, acum nu știu așa multe. Depindeam de un copil care putea să ne salveze și era o femeie care avea o putere foarte mare și îngheța fața. Sufla și îngheța toată fața. Și noi îi spuneam, hai, dezgheață fața, dezgheață, ca să ne ajute, nu? Și când începea să-i dezgheți fața și venea aia și se îngheța aia înapoi și vedeam ochii așa cum înghețau. Ciudat în seara. Stătea pe scaun și dormea așa cumva, dar ne auzea și vrea să fie de partea noastră, dar nu prea putea. În fine, foarte putea.
Te simți bine că ți-am spus
Da.
păi eu.
Da. Oricum,
N-ai cum să povestești și să explici. Interesant, auzi mai în detaliu, nu?
Mai până.
And in the next work from just a few years ago, I'm going to let my earnest teaching persona do the talking from inside the work so I can drink lots of water.
Here's a piece called Oh You Happy Roots, Branch and Mediatrix. And I made it in 2020 and it was first shown at Camden Arts Centre's The Botanical Mind exhibition. It uses an image recognition algorithm that searches from a live feed from a CCTV camera set up in the Camden Arts Centre garden in London. What you're seeing now is actually an earlier non-live version using existing footage. Working with computer coders Black Shuck, I developed an algorithm that searches for ciphers from the Literae Ignoti, a script devised for the Lingua Ignoti, a secret language, maybe the first conlang, created by the 12th century Christian visionary mystic Saint Hildegard von Bingen. The image recognition algorithm scans footage of undergrowth, woodland and forest, both real and virtual, and it's looking for the ciphers shapes that might be found in the dark, particularly in the shadows cast by, between and under the vegetation, a surreal manifestation. Once located, the code proceeds to assemble any discovered ciphers to spell out and murmur plant names from the 150 plants she catalogued in the Lingua Ignoti, as well as deviating to construct new hybrid varieties. Montaged images of these plant types and their hybrid forms surface through the algorithm, previous iterations receding behind them to generate an infinite garden, a massive green, verdure, viridity, chlorophyll.
Clansgap. Now watch the fluttering movements of the albino bat and try to focus on it. Its flight is creating the arcs of a hexafoil, the witch mark, which you'll remember from earlier.
So after that beautiful, serene mysticism of the amazing Hildegard von Bingen, let's come crashing back to everyday reality with a really uninteresting subject, other people's dreams. As you'll see in a few minutes, I personally find them really fascinating, or their collective potential fascinating, and I also find our awkward relationship to them fascinating. But also, perversely, generally, I always love jumping into subjects that most people might automatically dismiss as being boring or irrelevant or silly. So I'm sure some of you may have seen it, but there's a really good documentary series, How To with John Wilson. It's brilliant. It's on BBC iPlayer. But he made one episode called How to Remember Your Dreams. And in the following clip, you can see he's engaging with the difficulties of trying to tell someone else his dream. And in terms of metacognition and seeing ourselves seeing, please just watch out for the eye movements of the people he's trying to tell his dream to. They're politely, tolerantly smiling, but their eyes are darting away, looking to escape. Their eyes turn inwards to themselves as if to say, oh shit, I really don't want to hear the inside of this other person's head.
You had one dream recently where you walk into a laundromat in your neighborhood. But when you get in there, instead of washing machines lining the walls, it's all stoves. And people are cooking instead of washing their clothes. That was pretty much it. And you're not really sure what it says about you or your desires. You tried to talk to a handful of people about what it can mean. I walk around the city and I find it's like a laundromat, but there's no washing machines in it. But everyone seemed kind of uninterested and wanted to move on to the next subject as quickly as possible. There's no washing machines inside, it's just like stoves inside, and everyone's cooking. And when people did engage, all they wanted to do was tell you about their dreams, which you also found uninteresting and had a hard time connecting with.
I was just sitting on the side of a bank and the moon was out and it was relatively cool, and I was just in another landscape.
I'm flying a plane or just flying or paragliding or in a hot air balloon or lost in space, like flinging through space.
This is actually the earlier part of the dream where more of the creatures were still up on the roof. And there were a few humanoids like this, although most of them were generically what things looked like.
You felt kind of bad for your lack of interest, but maybe there's a logical reason for it. When someone describes a dream to you, they're asking you to care about something that never actually happened. You can try to grasp onto little details that you can relate to, but in order to appreciate it, you need to be willing to immerse yourself in a fantasy world. And maybe that's just not the kind of person you are.
As I mentioned earlier, the slight discomfort and awkwardness of saying, I'm an artist, a feeling which never goes away. And perhaps that feeling of discomfort and awkwardness is similar to what is felt when announcing to someone, I had this really amazing dream last night. The initial enthusiasm slowly turning to this deep embarrassment to see how poorly this storytelling is being received. So what is this about in our culture? The fear that both with art and dreams, others will find this subject it's kind of silly and self-indulgent, and yet that's brought into conflict with our own personal experience and beliefs that they feel like really important ways of encountering and exploring our worlds. As I mentioned, I'm right at the start of the practice-led PhD, which I'm doing here at Leeds Beckett. And as Marion mentioned, my clunky research question is the Dream Share, a tool for visualizing the co-created dream life of a community. And the clunky subtitle is the dreaming ecology of an island, visually co-created between its inhabitants and AI, and guided by indigenous Malaysian dream knowledge. And as I said, I'm just at the beginning of the research, which is why we're all meeting in that car park in November 2026 to figure out whether I actually found anything out. So I'm at the beginning, and yet I began developing this particular project in early 2022. So it's been going on a long time, but it's in continuity with a lot of my previous work created over the last 30 years. So I've often worked with the subject of sleep, which you might have noticed, and also the night, and hauntings, and dreaming, and hallucinations, and perceptions, and consciousness, and meditation, and usually exploring these ideas socially among small groups of people, often in specific environments. And I've also made artworks which include machines and codes that determine aspects of the artwork's unfolding appearance and meaning. So, with that sort of continuity behind it, what did I actually make? Well, I've made, and I'm continuing to make, a website, which, you know, I feel I need Tina Belcher again to go, oh. For me personally, this seems a really horribly dull and inert place to create and situate an artwork. But then I reassure myself that I often choose a kind of miserable or barren starting point. So again, there was a continuity with what I've made before. For example, creating something from the blank end of a videotape or the classified ads in a newspaper. It's right back in early 90s. To the cloakroom for an institution or a hedge in a public park. But playing in that dead space, that kind of awkward space, that sort of non-space, then slowly allows something to rise. It should be public now. It should have gone public over this weekend, but we're having a few problems with it. It just seems to work on Chrome. There's a few problems with it working in Safari, but along with all the other links and references, I'll send you a link to it. It should be public by the middle of next week, and you can take a look at it and you can play with it. But there is something very weird going on with Leeds Beckett University email addresses, that what they do, once they generate a dream, is they instantly delete it. We can't work out what's going on. It's something that's happening here with the hyper-secure system of Leeds Beckett email, because it doesn't happen with any other email address. So if you do want to use it, don't use your university email addresses. What else did I say? Oh, the dream cloud at the moment that you're seeing in the pictures is very full, because it's full of all these test dreams, and we've had all these beta testers testing it on Sheppy, but it'll be stripped right back to very few at the beginning when it's launched. But maybe, as artwork, it can be thought of as a kind of knot, partially creating and bounding a particular space. So we can think of it almost as a sort of digital architecture. I sometimes think about it as a kind of building. Of course, because of working on it, it's been entering my dreams, and in the dreams it has become a kind of building. So it's a kind of sculpture, it's a kind of building. And of course there's a distinct possibility that there's a risk that nobody might want to use it. And again, reaching for my food and cooking analogy, it's like spending months and months making this really big dinner, and then people turn up, but they sort of find that they don't really want to eat it because it's a bit too lemony or something. I mean, I really like the lemoniness, but you know, as I'm cooking, I become a bit immune to how much lemon I'm adding as I kept tasting it. And although I think it's delicious, here's a big thing that no one can eat because it's just too lemony for everyone else. So is that what's going to happen here? Well, we'll find out in the next few weeks and months. But just to run through some of its intentions and declarations. When I say it's, I keep using the term it's, I mean both it becomes a kind of mask for me, the artist, but also it's because I'm working with collaboratively with a group of other people who, unlike me, are hugely skilled in useful stuff. And it says it's a new free art project, and it works with any selected community's nocturnal dreams using generative AI to translate that community's dream descriptions into visual animations for them. These brief dream visualizations are then exhibited, automatically discovering connections with each other, so the dreams gravitate toward each other if they have commonalities. Maybe I should say here how, despite a level of kind of formality or perhaps an illusion of neutrality within the design of the site, it's also, of course, highly subjective. To me, it's my subjectivity, so a total solipsism, perhaps. Perhaps you can't get a more subjective content than the visual quality of our dreams. You can carefully describe your dream narrative to me, but I've no idea what yours looks like aesthetically. Ironically, they probably don't look much like surrealist art. I don't know, but I personally have never had a Dali or a Magritte or an Ernst, but I might have had probably more like an Ithel Colquhoun or a Maya Deren. I think that's more me. And furthermore, even with my own, I'm not sure how they actually look. They're based on a memory of, which I have when I wake. So they're based on a memory of seeing. They seem visual, but was I actually seeing them? So I've had to partly abstract that dream visuality to match what I feel is sort of the visual truth of the dream. So I needed to find a kind of poetic equivalent. And I settled on a kind of model style which resembles something which is like an odd mixture of classic Ladybird book watercolour illustrations combined with the strange blurred and distorted faces of a Francis Bacon painting. So for me that feels about right, but maybe only for me. And I'm wondering, why is there a kind of melancholy nostalgia in that aesthetic? I mean, like, why is it a kind of 1950s aesthetic? I have so many personal questions like these now folded out into public space. So these gathered collective dream memories rooted in place can now be shared with the public for wonder, research, exploration and discovery. So this new participatory project is initially created with the inhabitants of the Isle of Sheppey in Kent. It's a small island of about 40,000 people, and I can see the island across a small stretch of sea from the beach very close to where I live. And the tool uses generative artificial intelligence via smartphones and home computers to visualize and animate through text-to-image diffusion models the extraordinary imaginations of its entire community as manifested through their nocturnal dreams and described through these simple storytelling processes. Through this interaction, we hope to activate, democratize and make accessible dreaming's amazing involuntary nocturnal creativity. So the dream cloud, which you see here, shows the gathered dream essences, dream commons, as though suspended like kites flying above the island's landscape. And each string connecting the floating dreams back down to earth indicates the approximate location where the dreamer slept within one of 9 areas on the island. The cloud also reveals commonalities between dreams, clustering them around certain dreamt characters or objects, moods or events, creating a new and dynamic network of unconscious connections between individuals and communities on Sheppey. So we can discover if, for instance, a green fox is making its appearance in multiple dreams from multiple people living in the same area. When used with any community, the DreamShare Seer tool creates a dream archive. So it's a kind of journal, it's a kind of group artwork, an exhibition, it's a community citizen science experiment, it's a kind of carnival. And also with it, I'm sort of thinking of it as a form of ceremony, as a kind of ritual, an exercise, a gathering of storytellers, but ultimately a new way of connecting with each other and the landscapes we inhabit, informed by indigenous knowledge. And as the project evolves, and as the community helps shape the potential training of the AI, we will also create one collective dream visualization for the island's inhabitants. So it will be the sort of synthesis of all their dreamt contributions So as though it's the Isle of Shepherd's dream. So the Dream Share Seer tool itself as artwork has been designed to echo the structure and strange logic of a dream. So it's constantly evolving and changing, all carefully watched over by a group of brilliant Malaysian elders. So that's a sort of selection of the explanatory blurb, what is communicated to the viewer when they access this site. So that's all happening over the next 6 months, and then this tool can potentially be reapplied to another community. So I don't know, it could go to a small primary school in Wales, or the workers at a factory in Poland, or I don't know, a community in Leeds might like it. I should say that as well as the tool inventing and making and all this sort of digital work, we've also been doing a lot of essential groundwork and field work on Sheppey, talking to people who live there, seeking their advice on how it should best be kind of unfolded, what to call things, like what do the local people call the place names and such like. And so involving them in some of the processes and talking with the local schools and colleges, how we might work with them. There's a health centre. There's also, we're in discussions with someone who runs the art workshops with the 3 prisons on the island. 3 prisons. It's very important this project arises with the island community and is not externally imposed on it. A really important bit of inspiration for my research for this project is a short paragraph in his book Why We Sleep. And I was reading this, gave me really poor sleep at the start of the pandemic. I thought, this will have the answer. It's by Matthew Walker, who's a scientist and director of the Center for Human Sleep Science at the University of California, who specializes in neuroscience and psychology. And he writes, during REM sleep, your brain tests out and builds connections between vast stores of information using a bizarre algorithm that is biased towards seeking out the most distant, non-obvious associations, rather like a backwards Google search. In ways your waking brain would never attempt, the sleeping brain fuses together disparate sets of knowledge to foster impressive problem-solving abilities, informational alchemy. And as I read this, I thought a lot of my work takes the form of a dream. The distinct edges of normally separate categories are now blurring and melding into one another. So Matthew Walker's description of the process of dreaming resonated with me for many reasons, but particularly I took it as a kind of neuroscientific explanation for the importance of visual art, which I think through the visual seeks out the most distant, non-obvious associations. I think visual art is informational alchemy. And when I'm in a tutorial with a student, with an art student, the talk often looks a bit like this. So the student will often say, well, I really like this, and I like this, and I like this, and I really want to bring them all together, but I'm not sure how they're linked at the moment. And so the tutorial is partly about how do you kind of resolve that. And after 30 years of making work, I also pretty much start out with the same thing, saying the same thing to myself as I begin to work on a new piece. I really like this, and I like this, and I like this. How can I get them together? So there's always this wonderful stretching between differences, a kind of deep and intuitive connectivity between the non-obvious. So dreaming is a very odd archiving process that is inherently highly diverse and inclusive and experimental. So it's a kind of stretching between differences to connect seemingly totally disparate thoughts, memories and emotions. So putting things together that don't appear to belong together, which is what I think most art is doing. But what about my wider research context? So it's this. So Malaysia's indigenous Orang Asli peoples believe that their shared nocturnal dreams are healing communications from their ancestors and nature, and fundamentally guiding these communities' quotidian and spiritual interactions. So the value of dream knowledge, although it's prevalent across many cultures, seems to excel among the Orang Asli. At least I'm taking this, that they excel according to a very great psychological anthropologist, Professor Jeanette Maggio. So I asked her this very silly question. I said, globally, the British seem to me probably the most squeamish about the subject of dreaming. Which culture do you think is the most comfortable at incorporating dream work into everyday life? And she said, Malaysia. So I spent a few months there this time last year to try and find out more. And of course, the sharing of dream visions has also recurred throughout the history of art, and obviously not just Western art, and inspiring many of the Western pioneers of oneirology. Oneirology is the sort of the science of dreaming, and psychoanalysis believe that the study of dreams offers a royal road, that's what Freud called it, or the hidden door, that's what Jung calls it, to the unconscious. So whilst we know that sleep's capacity to heal is now being cherished as a sort of uncompromising interruption of capitalism's theft of our time. So that's Jonathan Crary writing about it in his book 24/7 about capitalism and sleep. What do I mean by this? Well, we know capitalism is damaging the quality of sleep we get, and therefore it must be erasing the process of dreaming, which makes us become more exhausted but more obedient consumers. Our form of capitalist society increasingly limits our contact with, or our energy for, making big leaps of imagination, to see all the cuts of art subjects, to perceive that there might be other ways of being that might be socially more harmonious and equal and less destructive. Feeling perhaps paralysed by our surrounding existential permacrises, how can we demonstrate something that, something that we all possess, not just art students, that we all possess these individual, unique and extraordinary capacities to imagine other ways of coexisting? So what is this fantastic self-generated cultural production, accessible to everyone, that costs us nothing, that we can do while slumbering, nocturnal dreaming? So you'd think sleep and dreaming would be a huge priority, but no, it's a subject mostly not taken seriously, derided as new agey nonsense. But the latest oneirological neuroscience still hasn't reached agreement over the functional mechanism of dreaming. So now returning to be more closely aligned with Freud's beliefs, that's the kind of latest science, neuroscience of dreaming, thinking that dreams may derive from a motivational structure with an evolutionary function and linked to foraging behaviour and memory consolidation, connecting between non-obvious associations. So, back to the form of a kind of backwards Google search. So I'm wondering, maybe applying the latest AI to dream sharing, accessing otherwise hidden knowledge, may echo the ancient social role of dreaming among the Orang Asli in Malaysia. So what else am I trying to find out through this artwork? Well, I'm partly asking why that might there be still such a lack of agreement as to what dreaming is and what it might be for, and indeed why is there such reluctance to engage with these fundamental questions, despite the majority of people dreaming every night across human history and across cultures. So despite the inherent visuality of dreaming, all existing dream databases are comprised only of users' written dream descriptions without their translation into imagery. So this project will be a first, and they don't address the location where the dream occurs. So this project of mine is giving this spatial context, the place of the dream. And what might then change in our relationship to ourselves, our sleep, our imaginations, our empathic attentions, and our role within our communities when we see our dreams externalized, translated into a short film and shared collectively via a process of individual storytelling. Equally, how might the mistranslations between our dream descriptions and their dreamed visualizations create a new understanding of both the visionary potentials but also the total limitations of AI and the intimacy of the human mind? So through data from ongoing participants in the project, I hope to discover whether a generative feedback loop develops whereby the act of using the tool changes the memory content and structure of the user's dreams. So to create an inclusive and collective and equal dream commons, how might this tool be made accessible to diverse publics who maybe previously have had little opportunity for participation in either a citizen science project or a socially engaged art project? And how might this process of dream sharing and its collective dream meshing be analogous to many indigenous communities, particularly the Malaysian Orang Asli, use of dreams to attain ongoing mutual spiritual and social knowledge? How might having the Dream Share Seer tool, guided by a Malaysian steering group, catalyse an awareness of these analogies for its UK participants and its wider audience, whilst giving the tool its own dreamlike structure of apparently strange combinations, small community on Sheppey and a diverse group based in Malaysia, where Orang Asli's
dreams are believed to be created by a fluid combination of ancestors, spirits and nature, could recent Western notions of intergenerational trauma be seen as a usefully comparable understanding as ancestors manifesting in dreams? And reciprocally, how might the valuing of Orang Asli dream knowledge beyond its domestic context in Malaysia help demonstrate Orang Asli's unique importance for other cultures to redress a national system there that currently really marginalises their significance? So through this project's aligning of collective dream processes with art practice, with both of them contextualised by indigenous dream practices, how might this help reduce our society's suspicions that both dreams and art have no inherent purpose or meaning, and allay the feelings of alienation when it seems that both dreams and art only have deep significance applied to them by a small elite of experts? And I'm also wondering if both dreams and visual art practice operate through a stretching between highly diverse and unlikely combinations of knowledge, informational alchemy. Do artists have stranger dreams than non-artists because this stretching exercise of the mind occurs in our daily creativity as well as in sleep? Or instead, are artists' dreams more boring because the mind's essential process of stretching between diverse bodies of knowledge ends up being satiated in the studio? So why does this project also need an unusual level of care? Well, I guess because most people are generally skeptical about the significance of dreams. Over here, they're also worried about the dangers of AI. In some ways, very rightly, they're also dubious about the importance of contemporary art. And mostly, if they don't live there, they're very negative about the community on Sheppey. And I mean by this, on mainland Kent, there's a lot of prejudice about the Isle of Sheppey. So we have a lot of obstacles to overcome in this project, and it's aimed at an art audience, non-art audience, very, very local audience, and an international audience. Okay, so there's so much else I wanted to say, but we've pretty much run out of time. So just a final note now on a little bit on AI and dreaming. So I've made a tool that appears to show the visualization of a participant's dreams, but maybe it also shows the opposite, that dreams can't be copied, that there are some things that can't be scraped into the huge data sets for large language models by the tech bros. Because as humans, we have no certainty as what our own, let alone anyone else's dream really looks like. We have a sense, and that sense is really important. AI is statistically guessing the next pixel, but you can't statistically guess what happens in a dream. You can't be predictive with that lack of logic, or at least our dream logic is one we don't understand yet, so eludes predictability. Indeed, when something strange and unusual or unpredictable or aberrant occurs in our daily life, something bad, something that punctures everyday reality, we say, it was like a dream, usually a bad dream, or we say, it was like a film. I have a whole other lecture about the long relationship between dreams and cinema, which I will also be giving in the car park in 2026 in November. So, AI is averaging, it's stereotyping what artist Trevor Paglen calls a kind of machine realism. So AI is homogenizing, it eradicates the marginal and idiosyncratic in order to average everything into what it was trained on, with all the troubling biases inherent in that. But paradoxically, because it's also a bit stupid, it ends up producing what appears to be aberrations that look like highly imaginative idiosyncratic responses, or the kind of aberrations that appear in dreams. Okay, so it's time to wake up or to go to sleep, depending on what state you're in. So it's 4:30, and yet there is a little moon that's just come up. So everyone, if you can bring out those 35mm slides from wherever you stored them. So only when I tap the bell again, you're not going to look at them yet. We're going to try and see what's on our individual slides together. We'll wait for the moon to fully appear,
This is just a baby placeholder moon. So we'll wait for until the moon fully appears as a mirror of the projector beam that produces it, with us in between, suspended, using it as a kind of light box screen so that we can view these pictures collectively, a group exploration of the individual images we chanced upon. And let's think of how, as a kind of data set, they span 25 years, and they're spanning a whole lot of different rolls of film and slide mounts and places and people, but now through us they're suspended together and all being explored separately and yet simultaneously. So we could think of this as a kind of analog form of the dream cloud, with us together as land, as island landscape, and the slides as a still from a dream, and our arms outstretched as a kind of kite line. Okay, so when I ring the bell, you'll have 30 seconds. Oh, you're gonna, okay, yeah, good, they're gonna dim the lights. So yeah, you'll have about 30 seconds to look at your image, explore it, enter its space, and then imagine that through doing this collectively, with the image you hold as your foundation, your starting point, everything else that is about to be seen by everyone else in this room will enter your dreams tonight, gathering together to create a whole. Okay, thank you. Good thinking about the light.
Yeah, I can follow this.
Thank you. That was amazing. Does anybody have any questions for Adam? We've got this strange box that we'll throw at you, apparently. But if anybody's got any questions, please put your hands up and I'll pass this around.
Where do those that don't dream fit into your dreamscape?
Good question. Apparently, everyone does dream, but you may not forget them. I mean, you may not remember them. So I think... You don't ever reach REM sleep?
I don't reach REM sleep, no.
Wow. Wow. Are you tired? Well, the connection between REM sleep and dreaming, there is a whole load of dreaming that happens in REM sleep, but there are some that happen in other bits. So there's often, that hypnagogic, do you not even get the so as you drift off to sleep? Not even then? Wow. Well, I mean, okay, maybe they're in there somewhere. Maybe just you could test the tool, just maybe through intuition, just adding a few bits, and then it will be showing you what is going on. You just maybe can't see it.
Thanks, Joe. Any more questions? Tom, I'm gonna. Apparently, you have to catch it.
Thank you. Thank you, Adam. That was wonderful. I can really hear my voice echoing back. That sounds bizarre. I'm really interested to know how many answers you do actually want from this. You seem very... you seem as though you don't want to have boundaries or limits or definitions in anything that you do. And answers always, to me, seem like ends to things. And I don't want this to end, and I don't think you want it to end either. And I'd be very interested to know whether, out of all the questions that you have, whether you do actually want answers to them or not.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Do I? Yeah.
You don't have to answer.
He wants the degree, though.
Yeah, I mean, they do just lead to other questions.
Sure.
So there is, yeah, I mean, it's a really good question. I think it is, there is a question of sort of pushing limits as well with things. And yeah, I mean, this particular project, yeah, it is very open and could be ongoing, and there's lots of different ways that's based on what happens. So it's a kind of experiment. Based on what happens, there could be particular things that become more important to search for and try and figure out. But then say with a project like Ghost, I mean, because that's so weirdly just about, it's like the artist and the viewer, and there's always a limit to that, which is my own kind of physical just tiredness. But also ultimately there will be, through age, a limit to how much I can do that. So at the moment I'm trying to kind of think through that. So some things do just, are going to come to a stop. But having said that, one of the things, so the Ghost project, I mean, the hours and hours and hours I've spent, and I didn't say, but I paddle people in silence. So we talk at the beginning, we talk when they get out, but otherwise it's in silence. Most of the time that I'm doing it, I'm thinking, what is this doing? Like, what am I trying to figure out from this? Or what is this really about? And however much I do it, I always feel like I'm getting close to it. But yeah, of course, it's always sort of pushed away, that answer. Yeah.
Thank you. Is the pushing away of the answer integral to the artistic process?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's,
I presume you could have conclusions or answers or maybes.
Yeah.
Could be that, but then would things just stop?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, the example I always think of in terms of that sort of very weird, which is why I'm sort of, because with things like, ideas of magic and ritual and stuff, that through the act of making things happen, and there's, but with any kind of research, you suddenly start coinciding with these things, and everything seems to be relevant, but there also seems as though there's a kind of almost sort of higher power of knowledge that's directing everything towards you. So with the example of Reunion Salo, when I made that piece, which was searching for the 16 adolescents who were all in the Pasolini film from 1975, so when I first started working on that, I had a really clear idea of what that piece was going to be, and so I filmed this thing, and it was a bit crap, but it felt like it was what I wanted. And then after it was made, I then was just chatting to the one person I found from the original film, so all the rest are played by extras, and I asked her how did she die in the original film, because I'd spent all this time in the archive and I could sort of see how everyone else was meeting their fictional ends within the film, but not her. And she said, "Oh, I asked not to participate in the, I asked Pasolini if I could avoid that, because I just didn't fancy it." And he was incredibly respectful and said, "Yeah, that's fine." So really weirdly, the one person who appeared who was still haunting the present, was the one person who didn't go through a fictional death. So I sort of suddenly thought, well, I'd made this thing, this artwork, but actually now I need to completely change it, because this is actually much more interesting. So that artwork just became a kind of ground for this thing to sort of appear out of it.
Sure.
As, and I keep thinking, well, if I hadn't been having this slightly awkward conversation while she was waiting to get her train back to the north of Italy, I wouldn't have found, because she didn't, she just told me practically as she was getting on the train in a very offhand way, "Oh, I didn't do that. I didn't die." So, yeah, so I kind of then think there is I guess this, through the act of making it, it just produces all these other things that I think we're sort of barely aware of.
Sure.
That I guess through listening and watching really carefully what happens, and I think for me anyway, not having a really sort of rigid plan, but allow the plan to kind of collapse.
Yeah.
Through it, engaging with the reality beyond the studio, I think is really important.
Sure. Thank you.
Veronica. Oh dear, right. Well done. Hi there. I loved it. It was great. Very exciting.
Thank you.
With that type of things binding together and then exploring it. I loved it. But my question was about dreams. You say it's a bit silly. People find it a bit boring, but I just read a bit uncomfortable. I don't want to share my dreams. It's very private more than anything. I can think of 3 people I would be comfortable sharing my dreams with. So the question is, I wonder whether I really agree with the base idea that dreams are not something that we consider real or important, but rather that it's very important and rather private.
Yeah, I mean that's really true. Which I guess is why there is this attempt to sort of bring in this idea of Indigenous dream work, where that sense of a kind of private space is also, that
like
you're sort
communal
of
versus
participating in the social
individualistic.
at night, and so all kinds of decisions need to be made about how, like where you plant the rice paddy fields, or who's going to be the next shaman or whatever. So they may be, they're private and idiosyncratic, whatever, but there's also, I guess, not an obligation, but just I guess I'm wondering, do they feel private because of a kind of shame? And that if that shame wasn't felt, it would be, these are public things. These are everyday. I mean, do you think it is that at all?
It struck me as very extroverted to want to share your dream with everybody, but also it might just be individualistic society versus communal society, and that type of distinction of what you should be sharing and what's okay to share.
Which it is so incredibly culturally specific, isn't it?
I don't want to share my dreams at a coffee break at work. That would be like sharing my sexual fantasies or something. It would be very awkward. But
there's a distinction between a dream and a nightmare, I think. You've sort of, there's an underlying suggestion of a kind of utopian quality to dreams as they're emerging in these projects, but there's also the sort of more, if you like, existential nihilistic fright of a dream. I think that people are less.
Which made me really like your project as well, because I would be more comfortable sharing it in a symbolized or thematic or rewritten or described in other words, or like in imagery, like you say. So I like that. That made it a little bit less raw, which is nice.
Yeah, thank you for your talk. Hello. I'm doing something a little bit similar, working with AI to visualize lived experience. So this sounds amazing, such a great resource. How did you, because of course AI art is really biased, how did you find that in your experience working with the community?
Sorry, which community?
Well, with your island dwellers. Sorry, I forgot the name of the island.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, the Isle of Sheppey community.
Yeah. So I find that I've worked before with women, talking about women's health and the lived experience.
Yeah.
And often you end up on an image of a beautiful white woman who is also slender. Did you find that in your project that AI art is quite biased because it uses the internet as its data set? How would you deal with that, and have you had to deal with this?
Yeah, I mean, it is really difficult. So you're talking about the biases that are built in through the training of it?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's just a nightmare. For one thing, because we haven't properly tested it yet with the community on the island, I don't know how many people have dreams about their local landscape or their local place. They may all be dreaming about, they may be dreaming about America as a landscape, but what you see really is really dominant in the data sets of imagery that AI is trained on is it's mostly American imagery. So earlier on, when we were testing it, we've mentioned sort of landscapes and places and people, like the police or whatever, and you'd always get this American one. So then I actually went to Sheppey and took loads and loads of pictures to then add that into the data set to shift it to be more like an English landscape, so at least you can kind of start with that.
So you pretty much created your own data set rather than using a tool that's already out there.
So it's using a tool that's already out there, but it's sort of fed into it's been sort of watered down or kind of beefed up with this British imagery. And then, just the fact that the whiteness of it, and so I'm sure you've the recent articles which were, so they then tried to tweak it to become more diverse, but because of the bias and racism with which it was trained in the first place, you would then get this sort of, so if asked to depict a Nazi, this was the example that was given. Recently, they found that there were all these kind of Asian and black-faced Nazis that AI would produce because of its biased associations. So, it really lacks nuance, but it was trying to sort of do the right thing in terms of diversity. But you're thinking, but this is, there's a sort of like different places to where that diversity is important, but other places where it's really important to say, no, this is not applicable to the Nazis. So it's a huge mess, and there seems to be ways that people are trying to deal with it, to try and make it, a kind of more wholesome environment. But the trouble is the people who are running it are these few tech bros, and there's also all the sort of competitive stuff in terms of sort of military stuff between, America and China and stuff. So everyone else sort of beneath that is saying, well, we need to work together, and also in terms of the training. So big tech knows that they just have to say, oh yeah, this is ethical AI or human-centered AI. So they know what to say now. But I think there seems to be this sort of, in all the sort of discourse around it, a lot of people talking about this notion of care within it, and that it's like parenting. So that you have to be a good parent to AI. Because if you then teach it good ethics from the outset, and then someone is trying to do something bad with it, it won't want to do it because it's been taught to behave in this kind of ethical, moral way. So that a lot of the discussion seems to have shifted, at least as a way of dealing with the biases and the problems with AI, to this notion of treating it in this, in terms of kind of human relationships.
It would be great to talk more, just us two at some point, if you're up for it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Do we have any more questions? Olivia.
Hi. You mentioned that you spent some time with the Malaysian indigenous community within your research, and I just wondered how you navigated that in an ethical way to ensure that you was respectful to the ancestral wisdom that you received and the procedures perhaps that the community put in place to allow you to, be a part of that, and moving forward how you respectfully treat that wisdom and but also share it to an audience that is outside of that community.
Those are really good questions. I was very lucky in the people who were sort of funded the trip with the British Council, who have a lot of good contacts with NGOs in Malaysia who are already doing that work with people from those communities. So I was totally dependent on having those connections who then facilitated me being able to find out more. So they're from those communities, or they're trying to work with those communities, and I mean, but the whole one of the issues with I guess that form of indigenous knowledge is it's not written down, so it's all oral, and there's also all these suspicions, because of colonial extraction and all kinds of other things, a suspicion about people coming to steal knowledge. But as well as that, there's also a whole kind of spiritual realm where by telling the Puakumba weavers will have a dream which is of the pattern that then goes into the fabric, but you never tell anyone, like not other people even within your community, what that dream was, or what the pattern was. I mean, they can see what the pattern is, but what the dream was, because if you speak it, it allows access to spirits coming into you and then through you into the weave, so that you kind of corrupt the weave. So even without an outsider being present, the sort of passing on of knowledge, whether it's about dream work or anything else, is quite difficult. But why, partly why I was there, and partly why I showed that book, what's it called, the Utopia of Dreaming, the Mystique of Dreams or something, the Domhoff book, is that there was this huge amount of, in the 20th century, there was all these Western anthropologists who were going to Malaysia, and particularly in exploring dream work. And then sort of it was like some pretty sort of sloppy anthropology, and that one of them just went and made it all up. And they were making up all this stuff that you could control dreams, and particularly that, which then in the 60s and 70s in America really caught on as a particular kind of dream technique that you could learn. So you'd learn Senoi dream technique in California, which was based on this total distortion of Malaysian dream work. So I'm just saying it is a sort of a really complicated system of finding things out, which may not actually be quite true, or it may be just that one person's opinion, because we can't totally trust the anthropology that's happened before, and the people who are working there have different ideas about it. So it's a very kind of flowing, unstable, but totally fascinating place. But also, there is this marginalising of the Orang Asli peoples by kind of wider Malaysian culture, and it's all to do with this because of the three main cultures that are in Malaysia, and trying to sort of suggest that Malaysians were there first and not Orang Asli. So there's a sort of contempt and disregard
and racism towards the Orang Asli peoples. So actually, you know, there's this other thing that by having a project or stuff about them that isn't in Malaysia is, you know, potentially quite a big deal, that there is people who are, you know, there are people who are kind of talking and interested in that community and in that culture. Sorry, that's a really woolly answer to your question. I could have just said, it's really complicated.
Thank you. Adam, thank you so much for a really fascinating, thought-provoking talk, and thank you all as an audience for coming. Thank you, broadcast media technology students and staff for recording, Dave for organising, and as I stand here holding this green box, thank you from Sue and myself for the end of 3 years of curating the Inside Out talks. But Adam, thank you so much.